Welcome to our first Work on Climate Talent Transition Summit. My name is Inbal Nachman. I'm the Managing Director of Work on Climate, and I will be facilitating the event today. On the call, we have a couple of other Work on Climate team members. You might have seen the stars next to our names. We have Sarah Singh and Angela McDonald, who will be present on the chat and in Slack, and they can answer any questions you might have. So they waved and hello. We also have Eugene on the call, and he also has a star next to his name there. We have a really exciting hour for you. I'm feeling very energized, and I hope you are as well. So on the agenda for today, we have put a lot of work and research into understanding what the current state of the climate workforce is, and we will walk you through our findings, plus what Work on Climate is doing about it in the next year. You'll also hear from our keynote speaker, Bill McKibben, who will give his take on the most important job on Earth. We'll end with a group exercise, since we are big believers in the power of relationships and networks. You'll have an opportunity to connect with others on this call who are all on their own climate work journeys. So without further ado, let's welcome Eugene Kirpichov, co-founder and executive director of Work on Climate. Welcome, Eugene.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the summit. I'm really excited to talk to you all about this large cause that we're tackling and the work that we're doing about it. I will begin with just articulating our mission. The mission of Work on Climate is to build the workforce needed to solve climate change equitably and justly. And by that, we mean the full scope of this mission. We don't just mean help some people. We mean that our work is not done until a workforce exists that can solve climate change equitably and justly. To give you a sense of the size of this problem, well, it's massive because solving climate change means that we need to rebuild every existing industry, such as transitioning, say, from gas cars to electric cars, from dirty energy to clean energy, from animal to plant protein, building out new industries like carbon markets and coastal resilience, and so on. And it's a lot. We're rebuilding the whole economy. So we're going to need hundreds of millions of people in all roles and in all industries working on this. This isn't going to be something for the climate industry on the side from the economy. This is the economy. This isn't going to be something for just the climate people to solve. This is going to be something for everyone who works in the economy to solve, which is everyone. And we're going to need to get there really fast, basically faster than any industry in the history of humanity has built a workforce. So we cannot rely on the market sorting this out. The market has not pulled off a labor transformation this big, this fast. We need to do it ourselves. We need to facilitate the coordination required to make this happen. The good news is that there is a lot of funding going into climate already, but the whole point of the funding is to pay the people. So we need to bring the people. And the kind of people that climate is going to need, well, that's everyone. When we talk about climate jobs, what we have in mind is any job that supports a climate solution, which can be in climate mitigation, adaptation, resiliency, or climate justice. It can be a role that requires a climate skills. It can be a role that doesn't require climate skills. For example, Tammy, a Work on Climate member, is a data scientist at the carbon accounting company called Watershed. She's a data scientist. She's not a climate scientist. The role can be at a climate company. It can be at a company that is not by itself focused on climate, but is doing a lot about climate nevertheless. For example, Seth, I believe, also has found a job in climate with the help of Work on Climate. And Seth works at Lush, which is a major cosmetics company. And Seth works as an activism campaigner. Likewise, it can be a job that you do because you care about climate, or it can be a job you do because you have been trained for it and because it pays good money and because you like the job. For example, a large fraction of people working in skilled labor are probably going to be in this category. However, this transition that we're going to have to pull off faces quite a few obstacles, pretty much for everyone involved. I'm going to zoom in more specifically on the struggles that job seekers are facing in a bit. But there are struggles that climate employers are facing. Many of their candidates don't even know that these companies exist. There are struggles that climate founders are facing. where they're deploying business models for which there is no prior art. They're the first ones to deploy them, and they don't have somebody to learn from, but they need to figure it out really quickly to make their company succeed fast enough. There are talent shortages in the corporate workforce, in the scientific workforce related to climate. There are talent shortages in the even executive workforce. For example, the absolute overwhelming majority of board members of top 100 US companies have no climate expertise. So we're going to need to help them with that if they're going to reorient their businesses to be climate positive. Just to zoom a bit more on the struggles that job seekers are facing, I think you're probably going to empathize with a lot of these struggles. We literally just yesterday published a report on our research project where we talked to, I believe, 19 or 20 active climate job seekers and conducted deep interviews and summarized the findings on what people are struggling with. And there is 5 broad categories of what we find people struggle with. A lot of it is just psychological barriers, because this is a very high stakes job search for many people emotionally. It's important to people to really get going and begin helping climate change as fast as they can. So it can be difficult when that's taking a long time. People often suffer from imposter syndrome because they're not sure if climate needs people like them, which it does, but that doesn't make it that much easier for people who are feeling this way. There are issues where people have perceived or actual skill gaps. So some climate roles do require climate specific expertise. Many don't, probably the majority don't, but people still suffer at least from the perception that, oh, do I really have the right skills? Is this really the field for me? There are similar issues with pay gaps, both perceived and actual. So for example, many climate companies are early stage startups, and they might not pay the same money as a gigantic corporate where you're working today. They probably pay the same as other startups at the same stage, but still for some people that can be a struggle. And there's another issue that people commonly cite, which is networking. Climate is a very rapidly developing field, and a lot of the knowledge only exists in people's heads. So oftentimes nothing is written up about the things you need to know to find the job, and you just need to talk to people. And that is, some people are not quite enjoying that experience, or don't necessarily have the temperament to have a good time just navigating the networks. It happens to be necessary right now, hopefully not in a few years, but this is one of the things that people struggle with today. And that is just the struggles of people who are actively looking for climate work. We need to remember that among the hundreds of millions of people we're going to need in climate, probably only a tiny, tiny minority are going to be people who were actively looking for climate work. Most are going to be people who are just looking for work. But even when it comes to climate work, today, most people aren't even looking for it because they perceive that this work doesn't need their skills and that there isn't much they can do about it. Or they think that there is no way they can get paid decently, which is, like I mentioned, often not true. Or they perceive that this work isn't going to be as interesting or prestigious as what they're doing. And all of this, it's pretty much symptoms of simply not being familiar with the landscape of climate work. But it does cause most people to not even consider the possibility of taking one of these jobs. So right now, actually, literally as we speak, we are running a research project understanding the attitudes of the general population in the US towards climate jobs. And we're already having some early results, expect a full report in a few months. But for now, for example, we're seeing that many people don't even realize that working in climate is something that can help climate. So we will have some work to do to combat that perception as well as the others. I want to point out, though, that at the root of all of these issues is really the issue that our talent ecosystem is not ready to deliver the climate workforce. It needs to. We're going to have a different economy. A shift in the economy needs to be accompanied by a shift in the talent ecosystem that feeds the economy. And it just hasn't happened yet. For example, if you consider a career path of an AI professional, it's going to be probably the same with an accountant, with an electrician, or someone else. But just for the sake of the argument, an AI professional, they might take an AI class at their school. They might take some classes at the business school, do some internships, go to AI meetups, AI conferences, look for work on the job board, and so on. And with the way the things are today, they're not going to hear a single word about how the skills are useful in climate. They're not going to meet any companies that are hiring people like them to work on climate solutions. They're not going to meet any people who can tell them about it. And they're just going to conclude that climate is something for other people to solve. So obviously it cannot continue this way. It needs to be the exact opposite of that, where this same AI professional, when they take an AI class, well, they hear about geospatial AI and how it can be used to measure forest carbon or soil carbon. When they go to a business school, they hear about corporate net zero plans and why and how companies buy carbon credits from forest or soil projects. When they go to an AI meetup, maybe they meet a company that uses AI to manage renewable energy assets. When they go to an AI conference, likewise, maybe they meet another company that does something of this sort and uses AI to solve climate. When they go to a job board, they see climate jobs highlighted. So what I'm getting at is that we need to get the entire power of the talent ecosystem on our side here. We cannot rely just on smaller, younger organizations like Work on Climate itself. We cannot rely just on ourselves to do this if we're going to bring hundreds of millions of people into climate work. We need the help of systems that are reaching billions of people. So essentially what we need is we need the equivalent of the net zero movement, but for the talent ecosystem, where just like today, every major organization, every self-respecting organization with large emissions has a plan to adapt to the climate positive economy and reduce their emissions. Likewise, every major organization that affects people's skills and careers needs to be ready to provide the skills and steer careers toward climate positive work. Here are some examples of what that might mean. There are quite a few institutions that would be involved in this. It is definitely not just job boards. It is all kinds of institutions. For example, schools. Well, schools need to make sure that everybody gets taught the skills needed to participate in a climate positive economy. And I don't mean that they need to learn about the dangers of climate change. I mean that when they take an accounting class, they need to learn carbon accounting. Likewise, schools need to make sure that their career services provide ways to connect with opportunities in working in climate. Job boards need to support climate job seekers and climate employers. The experience of searching for a climate job, if you're searching for one, should be a good one. Job boards need to highlight this work. Government bodies related to education and labor need to be standardizing curriculums related to skills needed to work on climate solutions. They need to be incentivizing schools to deploy them. Government bodies related to labor need to be incentivizing the creation of climate jobs or upskilling programs and incentivizing climate founders. The same needs to be happening with unions and industry associations, and conferences in every industry need to have a climate track and climate solutions companies at every other track. Recruiting agencies need to be equipped to help climate employers and help climate job seekers. Accelerators of all kinds need to be supporting climate solutions founders, and so on. So in a few months, you should expect that we will be publishing a sort of a rubric of organizations who could or need to be doing something about this, and basically tracking the progress of the field as a whole. How much of what needs to be happening is really happening. Let's zoom in for a second on schools just to get a sense for the complexity of the problem and where we are today. If we just consider schools, there are a few categories of things they can do. They can support climate job seekers among their students by having climate companies at job fairs or having climate progress and career services. And that isn't happening very much. Some really sort of progressive schools do this. Most don't. Schools need to be promoting climate innovation and research and commercialization of research on climate solutions. Well, if we look at schools that have a food science program, only a few of them have a focus or a program related to plant-based food. Schools need to be teaching generally the skills necessary to participate in building climate solutions. And most schools have some way to learn about climate change in general, but far fewer schools have programs specifically focused on building climate solutions or on climate positive business models. And I think maybe like 1 or 0 schools are including relevant climate solution skills into non-climate classes. So it is staying siloed right now. There are some welcome developments here. So schools are beginning to realize that this is something they need to change. For example, just recently, MIT conducted a climate education symposium where a bunch of schools gathered to figure out what they're going to do about this. But this is literally just happening as we speak. It is these efforts are in their infancy and they need to go a lot faster. Another facet of this is that just like all of the major talent ecosystem institutions need to change, similarly, we also need the young and targeted organizations that specifically support niches of the climate talent ecosystem as well. Just like to rebuild the economy, we need to rebuild existing industries and build new industries. The same is the case in the talent ecosystem. And there are quite a few organizations that are doing something to help get more people into climate work. And you're seeing just a few examples of them here. There are hundreds. Most of them are young and relatively small. But there are, for example, job boards like Climate Base. There are educational organizations like TerraDo and Climate Science and Student Energy. There are employee engagement organizations such as branches of Drawdown, there's Drawdown Labs or Climate Club. There is a variety of professional communities for people wanting to work on climate, and that is what we're most known for. But as you'll see shortly, that is far from all we do. And there is one more niche that is critical and missing. The niche is coordinating the overall transition, movement infrastructure, and today Work on Climate is the only organization that is working on this, to my knowledge. I really wish it wasn't the case. However, it is still the case. So the work that we're doing is really critical, and we need to do it well, and we need help with doing it. So let me tell you more about what are we actually doing about this all. Well, like I mentioned, most of you probably know our community, and we see the community as how we serve the early adopters of climate work, the people who are actively looking for climate work at the beginning of this multi-hundred million person labor transition, helping founders, helping early stage investors or employers, and so on. And the community provides the foundation for our long-term work, because the role of the early adopters is to scale the industry. But then once it scales, it needs infrastructure to support its functioning. And the longer term work of Work on Climate is to transform the talent ecosystem so that it is ready to deal with the hundreds of millions of jobs that there will be in climate. And this is where the long-term future of Work on Climate lies. And this is what we're beginning to work on right now. And we have already made some progress on that front. Let me tell you a little more about the community part of our work. Just a few numbers that I would like to proudly include. We are well over 20,000 people. We have helped our members with well over 100 events and thousands of free mentorship sessions with climate experts where people can come and talk to an expert about how are my skills useful in your area of expertise. We have a Slack community that many people are using and are using to connect with each other and with employers and with candidates and making all kinds of work connections. And we recently published an impact report where we analyzed how many people did we actually help find climate work. And based on data from December 2022, so 4 months ago, it was already almost 2,000 people that found a climate job and attributed to Work on Climate helping, which is an astonishingly high number, and it is a testament to the power of community. There is no way that we would have had nearly the same amount of impact if we were working by helping companies fill roles one by one or helping people one by one find jobs. The reason this works is that people in the community, people like you, are helping each other. This is the only way this can scale. So let me tell you how the community work we do falls into our overall movement building strategy. Well, I like to think of it as proceeding in 3 stages. Stage 1 is the community itself, where we are helping this group of early adopters, people who are sort of early to the game of the climate workforce. Stage 2 is what we're entering right now, where we're beginning to have influence in the ecosystem. and we're beginning to sort of activate pockets of the talent ecosystem. And we have already done some work on this front. For example, I talked that every conference in every industry needs to have a climate track. We have already run a climate track twice at one of the largest tech conferences. For example, I said that business schools need to be teaching climate business models. Just last week, we brought 6 climate founders to the business school at UPenn to demonstrate climate business models to a sort of mainstream business school audience. And of course, these are just the first steps. But the point is that we're accumulating case studies and best practices that we can then use to activate more organizations like this. We're also conducting research on the talent ecosystem so that we can identify what are the blockers, what are the interventions that work, and then we're going to use this to both advocate for these interventions, but also coordinate collaboration between organizations that can take action on them. And that means organizing conventions around specific issues that we identify. For example, say we identify that there is a talent shortage of battery experts. Well, the right stakeholders to convene around that are probably schools, research labs, venture VC firms, companies in need of this talent, and perhaps some government officials from the DOE. And likewise, so we're going to be organizing such conventions, and over time, more and more the work on climate is going to be around this movement building, or field building is another term for this. We're going to gradually turn into more of a collaboration engine behind the talent ecosystem on solving this transition problem, the problem of transitioning the talent ecosystem to be ready for building climate solutions. And in honor of that, we will be announcing a cross-organizational body that we'll call the Climate Workforce Coalition. It's going to be a network of organizations working together to rapidly build the climate workforce. So this will be a highly collaborative organizational body, and organizations that join it will be coming there to learn from each other, learn from each other's best practices, learn from findings of research around the barriers in the talent ecosystem. They will be coming there to collaborate with each other, to join conventions where they can solve these problems together and form working groups around specific challenges and just build trust to move on this faster. And organizations in this body will be able to speak to the outside world with a unified voice to advocate for other changes that need to happen to make this transition easier for them, pulling access to allies and funding, and so on. So this is by no means a new approach. This has been done before in many, many other fields, but it has not been done before for the climate talent transition. So we're taking a tried and true playbook and applying it to this critically important problem. So with that, if there are people in the audience who are affiliated with an organization that plays a significant role in shaping today's workforce, then, for example, perhaps you are or are connected to the dean of a major school, or perhaps you're on a major job board, or perhaps you're on a professional conference in your industry, or perhaps you're on a major non-climate recruiting agency, hit us up at this email, coalitioninterest@workonclimate.org, and we will begin talking to everyone who responds. And we're planning to conduct an initial convention of this group of organizations at the New York Climate Week in September 2023. So with that, I'm handing back to Inbal to introduce Bill.
All right. Thank you, Eugene, for all of that detail. We are now going to invite Bill McKibben to speak. Bill McKibben is an American environmental activist, author, and journalist who has played a pivotal role in raising public awareness about climate change. He published his first influential book, The End of Nature, in 1989, which is widely regarded as the first book for a general audience about climate change. And McKibben co-founded the international grassroots organization, 350.org, and has been recognized for his tireless advocacy with numerous awards, including the Right Livelihood Award. Bill, we are so grateful you were able to join us today. Off to you. Bill, can you hear us?
Can you hear me there?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
there you are.
You've turned me on. Good. A pleasure to be with you. I'm only going to talk with you for a few minutes today because, well, first of all, you've got important work to do, networking and all of that. And second of all, there's a sense in which I'm the wrong person to be doing this because I've never actually really managed to find paying work in this field myself. I've been a volunteer for many, many years in the climate fight, and happy enough for it, but that's partly because I'm old. Look, I did write the first book about all this a long time ago, and I've spent my lifetime on it, so I know a few big basic truths. One, climate change is by far the biggest thing that humans have ever done. Nothing even comes close to changing the temperature of the planet. And the transition that we will need to make in order to deal with that desperate fact will be the biggest economic transition that humans have ever made, at least over this kind of time scale. Normally, it takes 50 years, 100 years to fully switch from one energy model to another when you're going from wood to coal or whatever it is. And physics is not giving us that luxury. We have to move fast. And so the scale of this economic change is really without parallel. The closest thing to a parallel, perhaps, is the experience of the Allied nations, especially the US, at the onset of World War II. And I've done some writing about that over the years because it's of great interest to me, this question of how you can go fast enough. In that short period of time, just a year or two, the US transformed its economy. We stopped producing one whole category of things, consumer goods, and started producing another whole category of things, military goods. The plants that made cars were suddenly making airplanes. The plants that made seatbelts were suddenly making parachute cords, on and on and on and on. It took an extraordinary amount of effort and planning, and it took an extraordinary amount of retraining for people. In fact, there were entire new parts of the workforce that came into being. Women had not really engaged in manufacturing before that period, at least for a while, and all of a sudden there was Rosie the Riveter and so on. That remarkable shift is analogous to the scale of what we're going to have to be doing. And so I think the first thing I want to say is, do not worry that this is some fad that's going to disappear after a little while. This is the work of the next decades, the work for entire societies. In fact, it probably doesn't really make sense to think of it in your mind as a problem on a list of problems like other problems. In a sense, it makes more, it's smarter to think of it as almost a lens through which to view the world. For the last 100 years or so, the main lens through which we viewed the world is the lens of economic growth. And anything that made the economy bigger, we generally did. For the century to come, that lens is going to be the lens of climate survival, really. And anything that adds to our chances of that will be something that we end up doing. Now, it's been harder to get to the start of this fight than it should have been for many reasons, some of which Eugene's outlined, and some of which have to do with the endless opposition of the incumbent industries, especially fossil fuel, to let us begin making that transition. But that work is now underway. The passage of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the climate bill last summer, was a fairly landmark moment. It took 34 years and 40 days after Jim Hansen, the physicist, had first testified to Congress about the existence of climate change, what we then called the greenhouse effect. That's how long it took, 34 years, for Congress to act. But Congress finally did act, and that action, though far from perfect, does include enough money that it should be getting many, many, many projects of many kinds up and off the ground. I just interviewed John Podesta, the White House official, senior counselor to the president, who's in charge of, I think basically what he's in charge of is shoveling that money out the White House door as fast and efficiently as is humanly possible. And what we were talking about were the various bottlenecks that prevented action from happening quickly. And some of those relate to that tremendous opposition from the fossil fuel industry, their ability to stop new solar and wind projects, or to put bottlenecks in the queue of interconnections to the grid for renewable energy, or so on and so forth. But a lot of them related to just the issue we're talking about here today, which is training. Making this change this fast on this scale requires an ungodly number of people. And you all have heard probably the figure, because I started writing about it a couple of years ago, that we're going to need, at minimum in this country, 1 million electricians, new electricians, to get the job done. And we're going to need hundreds of thousands of carbon accountants, and just name a thing, and that's what we're going to need more of. I've taken to telling young people, when they ask me, as they often do, what job they should do to help the climate, I often now tell them, well, if you're good with your hands, think about being an electrician, because it's a good, stable job that you'll be paid well for right out the gate. And there's really nothing you can do right now that's going to be much more practically useful to the job of getting us off coal and gas and oil and onto clean energy. And there's no possible way around it. This is not, the best advice for me, because I teach at a liberal arts college. But truthfully, we probably need fewer environmental studies majors and more electricians in the whole scheme of things. But in fact, the climate crisis is so large and so wide-ranging that no matter what you're good at, where your interests lie, there are ways to make it a profoundly climate-centered job. You can be a theologian, or a psychologist, or a sociologist, or a engineer, obviously. In fact, the strange truth is that the one place where we probably don't need a huge influx of people anymore is straight on climate scientists. There's still work to be done in physics and atmospheric chemistry, but most of that has been performed. We know what we need to know about the peril that we're in. What we need now is the will and the skill to do something about it. So that's what I tell people over and over. But I also tell them, and I'll add this here, though it's not quite the message I think that I'm supposed to be delivering, that we also need you not to take jobs that will take up every single hour of your life, because a big part of the climate fight is going to continue being good citizens, doing the work of democracy to move us in the directions that we need to move. And that work mostly is unpaid, and it mostly gets done at nights and on weekends. And if everybody's working, billing 110 hours a week, then that work gets left behind. And it's important too in this fight. Do not neglect it, nor neglect the work of being out in the world that we're trying to save some of the time. Because that's an important part, among other things, of keeping up your spirit in what can be emotionally trying work. If you think of yourself as working on the climate, well, it's incredibly important and incredibly gratifying, but it's also going to involve a certain amount of loss over the next years, because we're not going to win every one of these fights. And it's painful when that happens. So you need to be able to do things in the world that brace you for that let you overcome it. But that's not career advice. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not great at career advice. What I am good at is understanding just how important the work that y'all are taking on really is. Every generation comes with its enormous challenge. And in our grandparents' generation, maybe it was fighting fascism in Europe. And that's why we had to change the American economy. And that's why lots of people 16 million Americans had to cross the Atlantic to kill or be killed in World War II. We're not asked to do anything quite that hard, but we are asked to take the talents and the gifts that we have in this world and figure out how to put them to use on the crisis of our time. And that we can figure out how to do it in ways that also allow people to build good and stable lives is really important. And that's why this work of this network and this organization are so important. So I really want to thank Eugene and everybody else for getting this going. And I really want to thank all of you for trying to figure out how to play as effective a role as you can in the most important task that you could be undertaking. As I was quoted at the beginning as saying, it's relatively few people who figure out how to play an effective role in the most important questions of their time. But if you figure out how to play an effective role in this fight, then you will honestly be able to say, I did the most useful thing with my life that I could have done. You need to get paid to do a job, but it also helps to have that sense that the job you're doing is of real importance to everyone around you and to the people who are going to come after you. And no job could be more important than figuring out a way to put your oar in here. So I really, really am grateful to everyone on this call and all the people like you, and I will look forward to seeing you down the road, both at the office and on the weekend on the street when we're also doing the work of continuing to push these systems forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. Really, really appreciate you being here. I think your perspective on the transition that we will need to make in order to address climate change is really unique. And what's really important to point out in what you said is the sense of urgency and the scale of the economic change that we need to make. And, given that fact, no matter what you're good at, there are going to be opportunities to make whatever career you have a profoundly climate-related job. Personally, also, I loved your point on finding balance in the work that you're doing, because being out in the world, we're trying to save is also just as important as the work that we're doing, because it is so emotionally loaded for many of us.
Yeah, I also wanna thank you for finding the time to join us. I thought I was already peak inspired about the work that we're doing. I'm now even more inspired, so it means a lot to have you here. Thank you so much again.
Yeah. All right, so we are now going to move into a group activity. At Work on Climate, we hold 3 key values that are at the center of how we show up for each other. So we focus on action, we participate and reciprocate, and we have an impact beyond ourselves. In the spirit of these values, we are going to split into breakout rooms where we will share stories and help each other find next steps that are meaningful and actionable for wherever you are on your climate career journey. The first task in your breakout room will be to refer back to the job seeker barriers we discussed earlier in our presentation. And don't worry, we will share the barriers if you can't recall. You will pick one barrier and share where you have struggled the most. Please keep this brief, no longer than a minute per person. Then someone from your group will volunteer to respond to the struggle presented with a story of how they overcame a similar challenge in the past. Again, no longer than a minute. And then finally, a person from the group will offer to help in a way that is relevant and actionable given the context of the story. And then the round will start again with a new share of a struggle. So you'll go one by one. As a reminder, the barriers presented are psychological barriers, skill gap perceptions, networking hurdles, pay gap perception, and filtering through the noise. We will post these on the chat as well. We will have 10 minutes for this exercise. So please remember to be respectful, treat all participants with kindness and consideration, stay on topic, keep discussions relevant to the assigned topic. I think that often stray conversations can be quite distracting and we only have a short amount of time. Be concise and clear. Speak briefly and clearly to give everyone an opportunity to contribute. This is something that we sometimes forget, is active listening. Pay attention to what others are saying and try to understand their perspectives. And then finally, just remember to share the floor. Encourage and allow everyone to participate. It's really wonderful if you can also make an effort to include quieter or less assertive participants in the conversation. So we will break you now into groups and we will see you back here in 10 minutes. All right. I know that for some of us, that was probably a hard landing back, but thank you for coming back and being here with us. I hope that you found this experience valuable. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 shares. If someone can volunteer to share what is one helpful offer of support that another member has presented to you.
I can start share. In my group. One of the folks mentioned that she was in Pennsylvania. And although I'm in California now, I originally come from Pittsburgh. And I know that there's a lot of people at Carnegie Mellon University with a data science and informatics background trying to kind of, facilitate some climate jobs and startups in Western Pennsylvania. So my action item is to kind of dig up some of my contacts and some of the local links to groups and job boards in that area.
Awesome. Thank you, Dimitri. Anyone else? One last share?
I'll speak up. We had somebody just graduated from university, and they've been running into a lot of cases where job descriptions are asking for years of experience. I mean, one of the things we talked about is, that happens a lot, and it's probably a preferred skill set from an organization or an employer, but to not let that hold them back from applying and to focus on the skill sets that they do have and are really good at, and ensure that the organization knows that. Because, while they might be asking for that experience, it might be a really good to have type thing, and then they might go with somebody with other skill sets that they really need.
Thank you, Joe. All right, so thank you guys all for sharing. As a follow-up from this exercise, I want to extend an offer for you to join our dedicated Slack channel for this event. It's right here on the screen, #events-summit 2023. If you're not part of our Slack community yet, you can join through workonclimate.org. And on the dedicated events channel, you will be able to connect with people you shared the space with today in the form of accountability groups. So for each accountability group that is formed, we will have an opportunity for that group to meet with a trained facilitator to continue and help on your journey. So with that, we have come to the conclusion of our event. Before you go, it would help us a lot if you could just pull out your phones, scan the QR code, and fill out this really quick survey. I promise it won't take more than 2 to 3 minutes. Really appreciate you all for being here. And just, wrapping up here, we hope that you've gained valuable insights into the state of the climate workforce and the challenges we face in building a sustainable future. More importantly, we hope that you've been inspired to take action. So I know that this has been repeated many times, but at Work on Climate, we believe in the power of community, and we are really grateful for each and every one of you who have joined us today. We encourage you to stay engaged with us and with each other, and to continue learning and growing as we work towards making climate work mainstream. So thank you all.
Thank you.